This is a question that is enormously interesting to economic historians, because there are rather wide-ranging, widely ranging chronologically accounts of capitalism. And there are also very narrow accounts of capitalism. So the word itself really only begins to be used in the middle of the 19th century. And so if you think of that linguistic approach, you might say, well, capitalism is just the modern world. But when we were talking in the lead up to this discussion, I was in Florence a few days ago, and when I looked down from the slopes of the hill of Fiesole onto Florence, it's really unimaginable that this city wasn't full of capitalism in the late Middle Ages. And I think also, actually, if you look at antiquity at both ends of the Eurasian landmass 2,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago, there are forms of capitalism there. And some people will go even further and say that capitalism can even exist in animal societies. So, what is capitalism? That's the good question that you ask. Capitalism is basically storing up assets that you can exchange in the future for something that you may not want at the moment, but that you may not even know that you want in the future. But if you take that definition, you might say that penguins in the Antarctic have some kind of form of capitalism, in the sense that male penguins like to apparently accumulate round pebbles that they exchange for sex with female penguins at some later stage. So that's a kind of primitive accumulation. If you take this approach, capitalism is really pretty eternal, and everybody is going to do capitalism, and you can find capitalism in the weirdest settings. So you can find it in the Gulag in the Soviet Union, that the prisoners are doing capitalism. You can find it in Nazi camps, even the wildest societies. That as long as there are groups of people, they will act in some kind of capitalist way. But I'm quite aware that most people don't really like this very extended version of capitalism, and so they will say that the society of medieval Florence, late medieval Florence, was merchant capitalism, and that in the 18th century there was a kind of state capitalism that was run through big chartered corporations like the East India Company in England, or in the United Netherlands, the Dutch equivalent, the VOC, the Dutch East India Corporation. Or they look then to industrial capitalism in the 19th century. This is the kind of modern version of capitalism, or financial capitalism from the 1970s. And I think that kind of focus of where the main innovation is going to change over time. I personally think that the era of financial capitalism is actually over now, and you mentioned at the beginning that we're in the age of a transition, and that we're going to a world in which much more is dependent upon information and the use and sale and organization of big data, and that's not going to be done primarily through the forms of financial institutions that were pushing the capitalism that reigned between the 1970s and the global financial crisis. So different forms of capitalism, but really capitalism is something pretty eternal.